Hi, and welcome back to Connecting with the Coaches. Today, we're going to be talking about how RAD, reactive attachment disorder, is on a spectrum. We've got kids that are on the more mild side, the moderate, the more severe, and then the extreme. And so let's talk just a little bit about what it looks like to have kids with these varying degrees of RAD, what it looks like for a family, and what help or what decisions, I guess, need to be made for these families. So I'm going off of a questionnaire that's called the Randolph Attachment Disorder Questionnaire, the Randolph Attachment Disorder Questionnaire, or the RADQ. And you can Google that. You can find that. You might want to find a professional who can give this test and then score it. But based on this, you can look at the more mild end of RAD, even before it becomes a disorder. Like if you're on the real low, before it would become like an attachment disorder, you might say this child has attachment issues. You can see there's something there. Um, the exciting thing about that is that with some help, you really have a good shot at having this child bond in your family. We were talking about this just a minute ago before we came on the air. Amy, why don't you share just a little bit about what you were saying with Karen Purvis and connected parenting and all of that in with the lower end of this?
Yeah. Yeah, with these kids, it really is a felt safety issue. I mean, the core of it is felt safety, and they just don't, they carry unsafety inside them, and they don't know, they don't have any capacity to feel any differently because people in their adults in their histories didn't make them feel that safe. And so they carry it with them and they need help co-regulating. And Karen Purpose's stuff is really excellent at that. It just really getting to the heart of calming their nervous system and all her tips and tricks for that.
Right. And just if you don't know, felt safety means that like if a child doesn't feel safe, it doesn't matter what you do to make them, you cannot make a child feel safe. They will just learn how to feel safe or not. And there are things we can do to help promote that, but you cannot talk a child into feeling safe. You cannot have a conversation with them and tell them how trustworthy you are. That doesn't do any good because until they feel safe, they will not act as if they feel safe. I just wanted to bring that up because sometimes we use language, and if people are coming on here for the first time, what is felt safety?
Well,
So,
and this and how we attribute how we tell the child that they're safe is from our own feelings. And so I don't subscribe to the fake it till you make it line because what's inside of me is not genuine. I'm doing whatever Karen Purvis said to do, but I'm doing it from my own uneasiness. That's the feeling. That's what the kids are feeling, is what you're feeling. And
Exactly.
so there's no words for that. There's just all it is fear. I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable. I'm not
yeah,
comfortable.
yeah, go ahead,
And
Jen.
I think that word too, Carrie, the felt safety, I think that has translated to a lot of parents that don't maybe understand the concept is, and they've maybe had professionals and other people in their life tell them, that they need to love them more, or they need to hold them more, or they need to rock them more, or they need to XYZ, fill in the blank, right? And so I think that safety has been translated to parents too. You're not doing enough. If you just did more, and like what you just said, Carrie, you can't make these kids feel
Right,
anything.
right. I
Mm-hmm.
just remember our son had been home for like 6 years, went to the
Mm-hmm.
grocery store with me every week. And I remember one time we were coming into the garage just as every other time we had come into the garage. Got into the garage, I closed the door behind me, and he got out, I got out, I grabbed the bags. I happened to get to the door before him and went in the house, and I heard him yell, "Wait!" And I remember just thinking, he doesn't even feel safe that like I'm not leaving him by
Mm-hmm.
going into the house. that I got to the door before him.
Mhm.
I needed to stop and wait for him and let him go in the house first
Mhm.
or talk to him or yeah, I don't know exactly what, but it just hit me like 6 years. And you
Mhm.
don't know that I'm not leaving you when we're home going into the house. That's an example of felt safety, not
Well,
being.
and it's a perfect example of like even after 6 years, that's ingrained in him, right? That's nothing
And I
the
can't talk him
child
out of
did.
that
Right.
Mm.
because we tried over and over. So let's talk about like when you get into the more mild range. There was I just attended a conference a couple weeks ago in Kansas City with from RAD advocates. It was called Navigating RAD, and they had a mom and her daughter, and the daughter had RAD as a child, and they discovered it was on the more um, what do you call that? The not extreme,
Manageable.
the more mild, yeah, the more mild side, the more manageable. And at some point, this young woman made the decision that she wanted to have what the other kids had. She wanted that relationship. And so she started actually doing the work. And it was hard. She went through some angry years, 9, 10, 11. She was very, very angry, but they were getting to the heart of it. And she was working with a therapist and working on her own trauma and dealing with the attachment stuff. She's now a young woman and she's, doing very, very well. And she and her mom have a good relationship. And I think that's what most client or clinicians kind of think that reactive attachment disorder is that if we put this work in, ta-da, it's all going to work out. And that is a beautiful story, and we pray that that would happen with so many more. But and it is a possibility if they're on the
Mhm.
mild side of that. We don't have experience with that in this group here, but I know, maybe some of our clients have. I
Mhm.
don't know. Some people have children, more than one child with RAD, and one will be very extreme and one isn't as extreme. And you can find this that wow, this one that wasn't so extreme, really, they did very well in life. So that's
Yeah.
very encouraging. Any
Mhm.
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Mm.
Yeah, what just came to my mind was the fact that a lot of clients will talk about, well, I don't, or sometimes even in the group context of the groups I run, listening to other people's stories, it's like, well, they start to think, well, maybe my RAD child doesn't have this severity, or maybe my situation isn't as bad.
Mhm.
But what I hope that this conversation conveys is that there is a spectrum, and that what is hard for you doesn't necessarily mean it would be similar to another family.
Right.
So to really try not as hard as you can to not compare your situation to another's, because I think when we hear of all these extreme big behaviors, then we think, well, really, I shouldn't be
What's the
complaining
big
about.
deal? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Well, and
So
also we learned like the difference between the inhibited and the disinhibited. And so one kind, and the way I like to say it is like the behaviors could either be very overt, like in your face. That's where they're more violent, they're more hostile, they're more aggressive. It's scary,
mhm,
can get very terrifying. But the other side of that is the covert. I'm sorry, yeah, overt and covert. Covert is like the under the table kind of stuff. It's like making you feel crazy all the time. It's the gaslighting and the manipulation and the acting very sweet, but so you never really see what's happening. You just
yeah,
feel like your skin is crawling and that you're going crazy. And, I learned this from some crisis response training is that you can get PTSD from either one of these.
mhm,
One is like a threat to your physical life,
mhm,
one is a threat to your psychological life.
mhm,
And when you start to feel like you're losing it and you don't even know what's real and you can't trust your intuition, your discernment, your God-given discernment, like you can't even hear from God anymore and you don't know what's true and what's not. That's a very scary place. And that's what happens with moms in particular when the children are on the more severe, even the moderate to severe end of that sliding scale of RAD.
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy. Did you have something? Oh, sorry. You looked
Oh,
like you had a
I
brilliant
was just
thought.
gonna
Go ahead, Jamie.
I
Jamie.
was just going to say that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're on the more mild end of it either, that it doesn't turn into the more extreme. I think a lot of times when these kids hit puberty and you have all these
Yeah.
hormones now happening in their body, that can make these behaviors bigger and louder and stronger and all
Yes.
sorts, like maybe not mild anymore, but maybe leading into the
Yeah, so true. With girls at puberty, it's, you start bringing in um, menstruation and hormones and all of that, and it can get really ugly and dirty and just disrespectful. And with boys, it's the testosterone starts kicking in, and some of that anger and rage from their trauma starts surfacing. And
Yeah.
it's just a scary place. I realized I can now just address either one of you by calling you Jamie, because then that's Jen or Amy. Gotta have a little humor in here too. Or that could just
Mm.
be trauma mama brain. Anyway,
I was
yeah.
gonna say, regarding teenagerville, um, the other thing that happens in that time is that the brain really has another growth spurt. And so I feel like, all the things that kind of stacked up in their childhood where they didn't have the capacity to think about it, introspect in any level. So the brain is changing. They're kind of having some more capacity to do a version of that, right? A teenage version of that. And you're talking about developmental delays. So it's still going to be not what an attached biological child would probably be, but just that idea that the brain is changing. They're having a new capacity to think about the past and try to understand it. And so they kind of get flooded with their history, and they're trying to make sense of it with a nervous system made sense of it from back there in that other place in space.
That
So
was
they
always
they
hyper
react
aroused and in PTSD and all of that. Yeah.
right. And so it's a real harsh disconnect between, especially when you're talking about, well, what doesn't really matter if they're foster kids, in America coming out of the situations that we take kids out of now or off the streets, in some other country. It's still just this really intense emotional and physio biological experience for them, and trying to make sense of that at age 11, when all this stuff comes flooding, is just really, really hard. And it comes out in the behaviors because there's
Yeah.
no words for it.
Right. So then as we move into the moderate to extreme, you start finding that sometimes the behaviors get so out of control, and the desire really is not there for therapy, for treatment, for change, for examining and looking at it, because it's just terrifying and they want to stay in control, which I just have to say is understandable coming out of what some of these kids have come out of. And the attachment piece of the trauma, it makes them want to push away anyone who's trying to be in a more intimate type relationship with them, because it's terrifying. So you do get into those ages, and we find sometimes that the kids are not safe, or other kids in the family are not safe, or mental health in the family is going down all around, and it's not a safe, thriving place for this child anymore. And so typically what we start looking at is either a boarding school or treatment or respite or something like that. And what we have all learned and experienced, and we can share some of this, is that sometimes that might be an okay situation while you're trying to look for something more long term. If things are just crazy and you have to have space, that would be a good option for a couple of months to get, your own nervous system calmed down, start dealing with some of your anxiety, your grief, all of that kind of stuff, so that your brain even can work to help you make a decision about what to do. But yeah, let's talk about that. When would treatment be a good option? What kind of options are there that we have all seen? And I know that there are others that we don't know about, but through our clients and our own experiences, we've looked at some of these. So what can you expect as a parent? When might you want to do something like this?
I remember our family counselor asking my husband and I at one point, is everyone in your family living their best life? And it stopped me in my tracks because I hadn't thought about it like that. You're so focused on the behaviors of the child with RAD that you're not really looking. I mean, you're aware of it, but you're not thinking clearly about the other children in the home, the marriage. Everyone's failing, but to have it worded like that, it was like, no one's living their best life.
Yeah, and Jen, I
Yeah, it
was
was at
just
that
thinking,
point.
we have so many clients who come in and they forget
Mhm.
that this isn't normal. Like,
Mhm.
we've been living in it for so long that like trauma is your everyday. Having a hyper aroused nervous system is your everyday. You are in fight or flight 24/7 every day. And so you
Right.
forget that there's another way to live. And you're like, well, it's become normal. So you think it's normal. And it's like, we don't even have to be living our best life. Like, are we functioning?
Right.
And
That was basically all she was
yeah,
asking. Are any of us functioning, optimally? And we both looked through there like, no. But we hadn't stopped to even ask ourselves that question up until that point.
because you were in survival.
You were in survival mode. You just do day after day after day after day. And it's a slow acclimation of the trauma. It doesn't happen overnight. So it's harder to assess it when you're in it,
Yeah.
living it incrementally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, as the mom who, we had such a great, peaceful, loving family and so much room for more that we did this, this thing of going and bringing another child into our home, right? Or two or three or five as they come these days.
Mhm.
And everything was fine before, fine enough to take this on. And now this thing came in with this child and things are not fine. So it's obvious that the issue is here, and if I fix the issue I can get my family back, I can go get my other kids and we can all sit on the couch and play a game or whatever again. Like, I just want my life back. I want, so let me just, and we get over focused on kind of fixing this issue. And it's not because we forgot our kids, it's because so that we can get them back as quick as possible, right? And it just creates such a burden on our nervous system interacting with the child that it's more like this.
Yeah. So what do you guys think about treatment and boarding schools and respite and some of these different things?
Well,
I mean, when would you see that it would be a benefit? When do you think it's not the best option?
when you're like this, you need some like there's healing doesn't happen when everybody's nervous system is so charged up that everybody's just in survival.
Right.
So, if you're starting to realize that, like, yeah, this is too familiar and we've been in this space for 6 months and it's not getting better,
Right.
like it's not going to get better by itself. Like, your nervous system doesn't settle down when it keeps getting
Yeah.
attacked, and
Well,
there's
and
doesn't have to be an attack to
right,
feel attacked. We've
right.
already established that. So at that point, yeah, you need the help of your pediatrician, you need the help of a psychiatrist probably to, get a recommendation, a referral
Hmm.
to some kind of treatment.
Right.
And generally they're like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. And, I have found people where, once again, if it was on the more moderate side or mild side of RAD, that could be very helpful, because if the child's nervous system can calm down, and typically they're adjusting meds, they're, trying to figure out what's going on and all of that, and some of that can be helpful. And if the parents, the goal would be that if the rest of the family could get their nervous systems calmed down, then when the child comes home, they have new tools to deal with it. And if it doesn't start exploding again right away, there's some potential for some real healing and growth. The challenge comes when everybody is so traumatized that even if the child were to get better, and you think about it, it's the intimacy and the relationships in the family that actually make this disorder what it is. And then when you go into treatment, you're not living in a family. You're living in a very different type of environment. And so it's not going to get triggered the same way until you come home again. And that's when it might get triggered. So it's the back and forth of this. But, I see a lot of families when their children get into the teen years, and especially into the middle to upper teens. I have several clients whose kids are needing to be in treatment until they're adults. Like, they cannot come home. It's very evident, either for the sake of animals or younger children or whatever in the home, that these kids just need to not be in a home environment. And at that conference I was telling you about, we heard a statistic that 15 to 18% of kids with RAD really cannot be in families. They can't, and they shouldn't be. Like, meaning can't means that
Well,
it triggers them so deeply that they can't hold on to themselves. They can't, they are dissociated like 24/7. They're constantly in fight or flight. They cannot learn. They're not functioning in school. They're not functioning anywhere because they're just so out of
right.
sorts.
At some point, you have to ask yourself, when does this become cruel to keep trying to give them something that they can't receive?
Yeah.
That it hurts too much.
Well, and that's kind of where we got, we were looking at this going, we thought all of this was going to help him.
That's the only reason we would do it.
Yeah, we would never have done this thinking it was going to harm him.
Right.
But here we are 8 years in, and nothing, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And he is not functioning. And now we're not functioning, and now our other children aren't functioning. So now we don't just have one traumatized person, we had 5.
Yeah.
And so what do we do? And at that point, you have to start looking at those things. And so for us, we made the decision, I talk about this a lot, you can tell how old I am, but like, Facebook didn't exist when we were going through this, and the internet was still pretty new. We didn't know how to Google, or I don't even know if Google was around, but everything was done in the yellow pages, and I couldn't find anything for something like this. There was nowhere to find anything. But you guys were going through it later than that, when the internet was around and when you could find some of these things. But it's not an easy thing to do. And so you have these choices of, are we looking at kind of institutionalization, or boarding school, or group home, or treatment for long periods of time? Or are we we made the choice for another family, trying to see if potentially, if his nervous system could get calmed down enough over there that he'd be able to attach in a new place when they weren't all triggered and all of that, because they were fresh. I remember just thinking, you guys are fresh. We're not fresh. We're done.
We're fresh out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I will say though that I do see a lot of the clients that I work with, the kids that are going to treatment centers, boarding schools, therapeutic facilities, they often do well in these places. And one of the components I think of that is they are not put in a position to have an intimate relationship with these workers at these treatment centers. It is not the attachment that you feel in a family. It is not that intimacy. It's not that vulnerability. And so their nervous systems can calm down because it's more of a teacher-student relationship, and
And the relationship with mom and dad has changed. I still have a mom and dad,
yes,
but I'm in charge of the space. I
yes,
created the space. I'm keeping this space, but I still have one.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that feels safe to them.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think, there could be some really good success with that
Mhm.
because then the
Yeah,
kids
and we just have to lower our expectation to
or
let that
change
need
them,
that
maybe
success.
change them. That
Yeah.
success is more about like learning how to function in the world
Yeah.
and being safe and
Mhm.
Hmm.
all of that
Hmm.
instead of you have to be in this family and
Yes,
have these specific behaviors.
yes,
As
Hmm.
long as they're safe to themselves and others and can contribute somehow in society, that's a win for a lot of the attachment
Exactly.
and trauma
yep,
Yeah.
challenges that some of these kids have faced.
yeah,
And
Well,
so,
I say lower our expectations because we all thought we were just, it wasn't going to be, we thought it was going to be a loving, mutual, you
yes,
know, experience. And so, I mean, it is lower from that in our, from our perspective,
yeah.
because we've experienced something that's better. It's healthier. We're created for this, and you are missing out if you don't have it.
Mhm.
mhm,
So that's why I use the word lower, but I understand that
Yeah.
we're also wanting to be careful to not
Yeah,
um
because nobody who has an
scapegoat the child with the
yeah,
situation. Like it's
nobody who
that's not
has
what we're
an
doing
attachment
here. Yeah,
disorder chose
yeah,
this.
right,
yeah.
Nobody, none of them wanted the trauma that they came out of. None of them wanted to be available
Exactly.
for adoption. None of this was their choice. And
Right.
it just shows what trauma does to
Yes.
brains and to nervous systems and to bodies and all of that. And so,
Mhm.
our prayer is always and consistently that God would intervene with each one of these kids and give them everything that they missed out on and everything that they need to have that fulfilling life that He created them for, whatever situation they find themselves in, and that the parents would be able to help find a place where they can calm down. So at least now, whether they're learning how to be in a family or not, at least they can pay attention to school and they can learn some skills and they can make friends and they can figure out life, which they were having a hard time doing in our homes and in the homes of many of our clients. And also
Right.
that we pray for the families that whatever happens, that you can recover and that there is healing for you and God has that for you too, and your marriages and your children and the family as a whole. So I hope this was a stimulating conversation. I feel like there's going to be so many people who relate to this. It's just not talked about very much. And we talk sometimes about even the adoption community or the foster community, and then we come down even a little tighter. Now we're talking about RAD. Now we're talking about we're it's a niche that we work
Mhm.
in. But we
Yeah.
want to be here for you guys. If you have other topics that you'd like us to talk about, reach out to Carrie O'Toole Ministries and let us know, and we'll see if we can't have a conversation about it. But I certainly love you guys and enjoy you so much. And thanks for contributing to this conversation. And we'll see you next time.